Back when I'd only used the SkyPads, the Cerapad Kin came out as the first of its kind as a controlled hardpad. All the reviews I'd watched prior to buying it were talking about how great it was to have the best of both worlds. The speed of a hardpad with the control of the best cloth pads. I was keen. Hardflex was the one main downside of glass pads, and if this pad could solve it, it really could be what I was looking for. The original Cerapad Kin had a coating and a break-in period. It led to the muddiest feeling pad I had ever tried. Yes, you could do harder flicks, but you sacrificed everything else in order to do it. Fluid aim and dynamic speed changes were insanely hard, and even when it had broken in, it still had that incredibly sticky feeling initial friction. But TJX knew of this issue. They released the Kin V2 and offered a replacement to anybody who bought the Kin V1. A very cool gesture for sure, and one I appreciated a lot, because I still thought there was potential in the idea. The V2 did not have a break-in period or as aggressive of a coating, ending up feeling much less sticky out of the box. For the first 4 or 5 hours, I was really enjoying this pad. It had a rougher feel to it, not necessarily scratchy, but definitely a texture. A texture comparable to a whetstone, which turned out to be fairly apt because it would grind the skates into dust within a day. Not only did the skates become so slow to the point of generating a muddy experience similar to the original Kin, they became so worn and scratchy that... I'll just play a video. Mute if you don't like the sound of nails on the chalkboard. 2 games with the Cerapad. Even skates like the Obsidian Pros were no match for this thing. It would have physical indentations in the skates after just 1 day. And a lot of people ended up having issues with sweat, leaving permanent stains, and the Cerakote coating wearing or chipping over time. And then, we have the Cerapad Kin X. Compared to the last Cerapad, the Kin X has 13% more dynamic friction and virtually no sticking to your arm. The smoothest Cerapad yet. TJX moved their plastic skates 15,000 kilometers in a straight back and forth motion on this pad, and there was next to no wear. This is the culmination of 4 generations of Cerapads, the ultimate controlled hardpad. Is any of that true at all? I really believe that the Cerapad had potential as an idea. The fresh skate experience on the Kin was solid, but this thing just confuses me. It keeps that muddy static friction from the other 2 pads, but the dynamic friction is actually much lower. It reminds me of when you forget to turn off enhanced pointer precision, where making any small movement is really hard, but as soon as you try to make a faster one, your mouse just goes flying. The Kin V2 at least had an identity, a controlled surface across the board that just so happens to devour your mouse skates. The Kin X? I don't see what niche it fills. It's not good at micro adjustments. It's awful at directional changes. It doesn't have a particular strength with stopping power. Dynamic speed changes are a huge issue for this thing. The only thing I liked it for was tracking and smooth linear lines. And the Kin V2 is just better at that. But the fact that you can print any image you want on a hardpad is actually really cool. I wanted a custom SkyPad so badly when the SkyPad 2 had just come out, and to be able to have a fully custom hardpad is something that's largely been missing from the market all the way since back then. If a lack of identity was the only issue the Cerapad Kin X had, I might be willing to overlook it, because custom printing is legitimately a great idea. But it gets worse. Virtually no sticking to your arm, they said. Have they used this mousepad? If you have even a single droplet of sweat on your hand, it will stick to this thing like glue. I know somebody who doesn't really use hard pads, but every hard pad I've tried that I've said, it's almost good enough to use without a sleeve. She's actually been totally fine with using them sleeveless. In fact, every hard pad on the market has actually been fine for her. Except this one. This one set her back 3 full voltaic ranks on air because she had never had to deal with skin stickiness before. For me, it's also pretty horrible. No hardpad is great for me, but I've never had to make such a conscious effort to have my fingers not touch the pad before. It just makes both stopping and starting incredibly inconsistent and really hard to control acceleration with. Maybe if you put your hand on top of the mouse and don't make any skin contact with the pad outside of your arm, it could be okay. But yeah, that's until there's 1% humidity in the air. Here's me moving my entire desk just using the stickiness of the pad. I can drag the whole desk forward. How would this ever be played? Okay, but it is a very smooth mousepad. There is some truth to the sentiment that the feel on the arm is textureless and pleasant. And despite the friction issues, the feel on fresh mouse skates is also smooth. Fresh mouse skates. Let's talk about how this pad wears skates. On the first day that I was trying the Cerapad, I was just coming up for the beast. I was completely fine with how my skates were doing as I started trying out other pads for the day. The first was the Cerapad. I used it for about an hour before trying out the desk to see if I liked it more. I used this for about another hour before feeling like going back to the beast. And I was obsessively looking for this piece of dust stuck under my skates, thinking that that had to be the cause of the scratchiness that was so much worse than just 2 hours ago. But there was none. My skates had just become unusable. But you can make an argument that it was the desk. Come on, it's a desk. It's not meant to be used as a mouse pad. Obviously, it's gonna ruin your skates. But then, with some fresh skates, I used the desk for a whole day. It went back to the beast. And nothing. I'm still using those skates from when I used the desk as I write this script, because these skates haven't touched the Cerapad. The desk was not the problem. But okay, let's be more fair to the Cerapad. I'll showcase the before and after of using a fresh pair of skates on the Cerapad Kin X for 2 days. With totally fresh skates, this pad's feel is actually pretty comparable to the original Cerapad, which was their take on a speed pad. Just a pretty slick ceramic surface with slightly sticky initial friction. I still had some issues with continuity in my aim, and leaned a lot more into movement to avoid having to make micros, but I was playing surprisingly well. I had quite a lot of flick confidence using this thing, and that kinda confused me for a bit. But then I realized that because the static friction is so high, it's actually really hard to be shaky post-flick. It actually ended up sending me on a search for a pad that would give me a similar level of flick confidence because there were elements of what I was looking for from a control pad here. But there were just too many downsides to having such high static friction. Making post-flick adjustments became extremely hard. You lose a lot of fine control over your deceleration, and there's a lot of difficulty with continuity and blending motions. I have to give it some credit here. It's almost like doing a mouse lift where you can flick really fast and use the high static friction to keep your crosshair locked in place, which gives you some really flashy clips. If that's something you're looking for, then there is some sort of use case here. But giving up on some amount of well-roundedness and flow was just a bit too much of an ask for me. Battlefield 5 was essentially an ideal use case though. In duels I can often leverage movement, most tracking is fairly linear, and the targets I'm flicking to aren't that mobile. So it's not that big of an issue to have such nerfed fluidity. Nearing the end of the testing period, I decided to try Apex, which should be this pad's worst nightmare. So much fine control is needed for the tracking in that game, and the duels require a ton of directional changes. I'm pretty washed at Apex, but the DM games I played with the Cerapad had me feeling like the worst player on the planet. This was just after 1 hour of Gunfire Reborn, 4 to 5 hours of Battlefield 5, 30 minutes of RoboQuest, another hour of Apex Legends, and general desktop use over the course of about 2 days. After about just 2 hours, I could tell the skates were getting slower. Though I intended to use the skates until it became completely unusable and unbearably scratchy, these Apex games were so soul-crushingly difficult that I just gave up and called it there. So I'm using the Beast here to showcase wear because it has a very noticeable audio difference with worn skates, and I can't communicate the feel of wear through video. This is what the skates sounded like at the start of the test period. And this is what the skates sounded like after about 7 hours of FPS gameplay. No more Cerapad, please. Even after trying to get a palette cleanser by going back to the Beast with new skates, I was still having some of the same problems. The amount of extra force and tension I was applying on fine motions carried over, and I was obsessively avoiding finger contact with the pad, both of which seriously hurt my aim. Thankfully, this didn't last too long, but it's insane that a mousepad can make your aim worse even after you stop using it. Regardless of how smooth the Cerapad surface is, it doesn't matter once the skates are worn, which just happens in a day or two. Full-size skates just don't work at all on this pad either. I don't like them very much on hardpads to begin with, but they're especially awful feeling here. PTFE skates made the pad usable for a bit, but wore in 2 days. Unwiped skates are just way too sticky feeling on an already sticky feeling pad, and also don't survive. I feel like I might get the argument that you have to use the TJX PlastiX skates for this pad, made by the same company. And first of all, is this really something we'd want in the market? You have to buy the skates for the set bonus from the same brand, just to use their mouse pad? Okay, but admittedly, I haven't used the PlastiX on the Kin X, so you can disregard this section if you like. But I did buy and use the PlastiX for the Kin V2. which seems to have a similar wear rate. I bought some as soon as they were released for myself and a friend. We both thought the Cerapad with the wear issue could be insane. I used them for a month and put together some clips and a few thoughts, which were as follows. The PlastiX are kind of like what the Obsidian Pros tried to do, but better. A slower skate with higher durability. The claims of infinite durability are not true. On the Cerapad, it's still wearing way too fast and becoming too muddy to use that pad. On other glass pads, it adds a bit of control without becoming as muddy as the Obsidian Pros, and adds a bit of texture to the glide. Generally, positive stuff. But after the month ended, I went back to the Jades. And the smoothness I felt under my mouse was like having a cold drink after I was steadily being deprived of water without realizing. The PlastiX had become so scratchy and overly textured, but it happened so slowly that I just thought it was a little bit too textured, until I tried something else. If you only ever intend to use something other than the Cerapad, these skates aren't horrible. But I don't know what kind of metric TJX is doing to say that these skates have infinite durability on the Kin. And I haven't heard of many people who still use this skate to know if I'm an outlier here. But the one other person I bought this skate for agreed it didn't fix her Cerapad for more than a few days, and didn't really like it when she used it on her Heian. She kept using the PlastiX anyway because it was a gift, and then it permanently created a slow spot on her Heian. My bad. But even disregarding all of the quality of life issues this pad has, we can still come back to the friction balance. The notion that the dynamic friction is 13% higher.
The new surface has about 13% more dynamic friction than the V2, and about the same static friction.
Is insane. It's without a doubt unambiguously faster than the Kin V2. Every reviewer who's published something about this pad has said that it's faster so far. So we have a pad that is supposedly the same static friction as the Kin V2, but notably lower dynamic. The effect of this is a pad that feels slippery. It's like using a tactile switch on a keyboard. You have to overcome the initial force requirement at the start of the movement, and with very tactile switches, it's hard to stop right after you clear the initial force. Some switches are so tactile that as soon as you get past the bump, you bottom out the key instantly. This is that in mousepad form. Fine adjustments and directional changes are almost impossible to do cleanly. Tracking with a lot of directional changes in particular is just unbelievably awful, and it's definitely the pad too. The friend earlier who dropped 3 ranks on air got the highest possible rank on the scenario 5 minutes later on a 0 soft. And here's some gameplay of mine with the Cerapad. Notice how I struggle to track distant targets that require fine movements, experience additional choppiness in my tracking, am very aggressive with my readjustments because I have to be, and have a hard time speed matching my targets. And this is my gameplay with the Beast from the past week. This is my first time playing Apex in nearly 2 years, and I'm not particularly good at this game either way. But the previously described issues are not nearly as bad. You can look at the gameplay of other people playing tracking games with and without the Kin too, and you'll likely notice the same thing. Difficulty with micro-tracking and smooth directional changes. And at the end of the day, this is not really a control pad. It just has high static friction. It doesn't help you control your mouse movements at all, aside from keeping your mouse completely still. If it had relatively low static friction and higher dynamic, it'd be easy to start moving, and the pad helps you stop your flick. Or if it has high static and high dynamic, then it would at least feel consistently slow and help your mouse feel very stable. High static and low dynamic to this extent just makes it good at nothing? You can't even make the argument of, oh well, it's meant for tech shooters, not your ADHD brain games. Because why would you want to make it hard to micro-adjust when that's 90% of the aim in those kinds of games? The Kin V2, okay, I get it, fair enough, but I don't see the niche that this thing fills. My friend asked me, is the Kin X the worst mousepad ever made? No. The quality control is pretty good. The printing is very clear and pretty, and it has a somewhat smooth surface. But then she asked, well, what's worse than this? And I drew her blank. Even a random piece of cloth you get off of Temu at least won't reduce your mouse skates to dust. I have never felt like I was fighting my mousepad more than when I was using the Kin X. I don't know if this pad will also inherit the issues with the ceramic coating on the previous iterations, or if the fact that the printing is on the surface of the pad means that it'll wear over time, but it doesn't even matter. As a mousepad, it's just not good at anything. I don't want this to be a targeted attack at TJX. My one experience with customer support was lovely, and they seem like a pretty passionate group of people making a product they believe in. I'm gonna break up the flow of the video here because I had finished this video before I stumbled upon this issue. It turns out, reviewers had received a completely different rubber backing to the consumers. Review copies had a fully rubberized base, like every modern glass pad does these days. And I think that improvement has been a huge factor in why modern glass pads feel a bit smoother, more consistent, quieter, and a bit more dust resistant than the original attempts at glass pads. But consumer copies don't get this. They get the 4 rubberized feet that we saw in the SkyPad 2 in 2020, and the glass cutting board that I got for $40. I have not seen this discrepancy mentioned in any of the reviews posted from people who received this pad pre-release, and I don't know what they were told, but it is exceptionally hard to find any info about this problem even existing. They don't mention the base at all on the product page. I only found out about this because of a live stream another reviewer did, where he mentioned it in passing 12 minutes into a 2-hour VOD. Supposedly, they will be changing to a full silicone base in the future, once they get the ability to print designs in the base as well. But we have no ETA, and I'm a little bit shocked nobody else is talking about this. People took great issue with the fact that Boardsy received multiple perfect QC copies of mice, because companies knew that he was the one receiving, and he would paint it in a better light. And to intentionally give reviewers a different version of the product that is objectively better, and not reveal that fact to the audience? I'm kind of floored at that level of misrepresentation, or at least withholding of information that would be relevant to someone buying it. And at the end of the day, they are in a sea of positive reviews, and I'm just one random person. I still think the idea of a controlled Hardpad is interesting, and there's something to this niche. But I just don't understand all of the hype behind this brand as it stands, and I don't think it's fair to just be able to say anything about your pad without it being substantiated. They have gone on record as to say that a lot of the negativity levied towards their brand can be disproven with the numbers. They have a robotic setup to accurately provide hard data with minimal variance to show where their pad stacks up. I'm not anti-science, obviously, but it's a mouse pad. The perceived speed and friction is just as important as the data you get from rigorous testing. A very reputable source within the community also tested the beast with a similar robotic setup, and got a result that placed its speed lower than basically every other glass pad on the market. Anybody who's actually used that pad would tell you that it's the fastest glass pad in existence. And I feel like anybody who's used both the Kin X and the Kin V2 would tell you that the Kin X is a faster mousepad. Maybe it's how we perceive the smoothness, or maybe it's just skate variance, but saying your entire consumer base's complaints are invalid because you have a robot is not fair. It reminds me of a similar discussion that occurs within the alternate layout community. Workman was the first layout I had ever used, and I made a video about getting to a pretty good speed with it a while ago. The creator of the layout made a lot of compelling arguments using a layout analyzer. He touted that his layout was better than the widely accepted best layout, due to reducing lateral movement, having some of the best stats for even hand usage, minimizing finger travel, ease of learning, comfort, and flow. He ran his layout through the analyzer, and the data confirmed his findings. The arguments were compelling enough for me to pick it up and learn it for a few months. However, when you pull up a diagram of all of the alternate keyboard layouts ever made, you can see which one the community recommends in 2024. Things like Semimac, Canary, and Colmac. Layouts designed by passionate people who use that data to help them design, but they recognize that data is not the be-all and end-all measure of what makes a good layout. In this diagram, there are only 5 layouts designated as not recommended. First being all the variants of QWERTY, then the first layout ever made in 1936, Carpal X layouts, which are computer-generated layouts, Hallmac, which is AI designed, and Workman. I can confirm with first-hand experience that the Workman layout is worse than every other layout I've tried since then, by a significant margin, despite what the data suggested. The human element of peripherals and input will always be the most important factor when the end goal is for humans to interface with them. Maybe all of my critiques are just subjective and worthless, and that's fine. It's up to you whether or not to place any value on them. This thing is not an unusable mousepad. I actually got some clips I'm quite proud of on this thing. So if you are a relatively casual player who wants a hardpad with custom art, aren't bothered by the sensory feedback on your skates, or replacing them frequently, then go for it. That's about the only use case I can see for this thing, though. I really don't like making negative reviews, but I also still have a lot of passion for this niche and hobby, and I'm frustrated with the direction a lot of brands are seeming to go in. If you are too, I hope this was useful to you. Thanks for watching.